The best Shakespeare I ever saw was at a summer camp. My 12-year-old godson, Ray, and his best friends, Sapiwo and Danny, signed up for a 3-week day camp, Camp Shakespeare, run by apprentices of the Royal Shakespeare Company, where they teach kids how to read, how to listen to, how to speak, how to perform the plays. And at the end of 3 weeks, there's a big final performance where all the kids divide up into squads and they get to do one scene apiece for 300 adoring family and friends. Now, Ray Ray is a wild one. And with Sapiwo and Danny, they were the terrors of Camp Shakespeare. So when they're assigning scenes out to the kids, Ray, Sapiwo, and Danny all ask for something really nasty. And they get it. The murder of the Duke of Clarence from Richard III. Now, this is a delicious scene because Richard III is Shakespeare's first great comedy. And I know that it gets listed as a tragedy, but you see, a tragedy is where a lot of people get killed and you feel sorry for some of them. In Richard III, a lot of people get killed, and you don't feel sorry for any of them. They all have it coming. Richard III is actually a sequel. It's episode 4 that comes right after Henry VI, parts 1, 2, and 3. Now, these were the first 3 plays that Shakespeare ever wrote. And they suck.
Oh, sorry, I must have come in at the wrong time.
Have a seat.
Great, continue.
See, Henry VI does not make for very good theater right now. It's just one long soap opera about the War of the Roses. And for us, there's not really much poetry in it. But for the riffraff in the cheap seats, Henry VI was like Dynasty meets professional wrestling. They got to throw sweetmeats at the stage as they saw the nobility of England marching on and off the stage, stabbing each other and screwing each other and smashing chairs over each other's head. Woo-hoo! Sunday, Sunday, Sunday at the Globe Theater. And Richard III is Shakespeare's first good play because it happens when all the violence has cooled off and all the playwright has left is one interesting character. Richard III is one of the only plays in Shakespeare that features a storyteller. Okay, granted, he's a twisted, murdering hunchback, but say what you will about Richard, Duke of Gloucester, he does have a relationship with the audience. The way that very few other Shakespeare characters have. Even the greatest characters like Lady Macbeth and Hamlet, when they speak alone on stage, they're talking to God. They're talking to the air. They're talking to themselves. When Richard is up there, he's talking to you. And the audience knows this guy because he was one of the most vicious characters from Henry VI, Part 3. And the play begins with an apology. Richard takes the stage alone and gives a curtain speech where he tells the audience what a lame-ass play this is gonna be. Now is the winter of our discontent made glorious summer by the son of York. Grim-visaged war hath smoothed his wrinkled front, and now, instead of mounting barbed steeds to fright the souls of fearful adversaries, he capers nimbly in a lady's chamber to the lascivious pleasing of a lute. And it's like Darth Vader had appeared at the beginning of The Empire Strikes Back. The Death Star has been destroyed. Peace and harmony reign through the galaxy. This film is now a romantic comedy. Directed by Merchant Ivory. And you see, that's not what the audience came to see. So Richard strikes up this evil bargain with the riffraff in the cheap seats. He says, if you want to get the good stuff, if you want to get back to all that murder and betrayal, you stick with me. And you'll get what you came for. And the murder of the Duke of Clarence is the first bit of lovely ultra-violence that Richard serves up. See, Richard has an older brother, the Duke of Clarence. Right there, that's his first mistake, the Duke's, because it puts him in line for the throne ahead of Richard. And to make matters even more delicious, he is the perfect assassination target. The Duke of Clarence is the classic upper-class English twit. Picture Fraser Crane as played by Sir John Gielgud. And Richard gets him set up to be thrown into the Tower of London, but just to make sure this ends appropriately, Richard hires himself a couple of hitmen. Now, if there is one rule in Shakespeare, it is that paid assassins are never very bright. And if Quentin Tarantino learned one thing from Shakespeare, it is that there is nothing in the world more entertaining than a couple of incompetent murderers. And Pulp Fiction, like Fargo and Goodfellas, these are all just remakes of Act 1, Scene 4 of Richard III. This is the original botched mob hit. And the scene begins as the murderers come bursting into the Tower of London. And instead of just killing the Duke right there, immediately, they have to get into this long argument with the guy. And this is the mistake that Batman villains always make. You know, I mean, instead of just dropping Robin into the vat of boiling chocolate immediately, they have to argue with him until the next commercial. And even after the Duke starts getting stabbed, he goes on and on with this pompous death speech. And if you ask someone from the Royal Shakespeare Company why the Duke of Clarence gets 5 pages in the first folio after he takes the first knife hit, they will tell you that Shakespeare doesn't really mean for this to be happening in real time. That the action in the play has stopped. And in the freeze frame, the Duke is allowed to pour out all the poetry in his soul in the instant before he dies. And I say, that's bullshit. You see, when Shakespeare wants a character to die, they die. Particularly when you're talking about a knife between the ribs, which, let's face it, is the leading cause of death among Shakespeare's characters. When Hamlet stabs Polonius through the curtain, Polonius gets 4 words. Oh, I am slain. When the senators make Swiss cheese out of Julius Caesar, he gets 3 words in Latin and 3 words in English. Et tu, Brute, then fall, Caesar. And that was the title character of the play. So when some minor nobody like the Duke of Clarence buys it in the first act and still goes on for 10 minutes on stage, I don't think that's a metaphor. I think Shakespeare is trying to indicate that the stabbers just aren't very good at it. So, Ray and Sapiwo and Danny had been rehearsing like demons. And about a week before the performance, Ray comes up to his camp counselors and he says, hey, maybe when I get stabbed as the Duke of Clarence, maybe I can put a bag of fake blood under my shirt. And his counselors are appalled. No. We teach method acting here. You will show the audience your bleeding through your intention, through your emotional commitment. We don't believe in cheap special effects here. Which is such an insult to Shakespeare. I mean, here is a guy who wrote plays featuring hurricanes and cavalry charges and shipwrecks. There are beheadings on stage. There are murders by suffocation, a suicide by snake. Witches conjure up apparitions. Ghosts wander in and off the scene like it's the spooky house in Scooby-Doo. This is not a guy who had a problem with cheap special effects. And besides, it is unforgivably cruel to tell a 12-year-old boy that he is going to be stabbed to death in front of 300 family and friends, and yet deny him the privilege of a bag of fake blood. So come the morning of the show, Ray decides with his partners in crime that in the spirit of Richard III, they're just gonna disobey. And I'm sitting in Ray's kitchen where he pulls out the biggest Ziploc bag his mother has. You know, the kind you'd stuff a pot roast into. And Sapiwo and Danny show up with grocery bags full of 3 gallons of V8 juice, and 5 cans of tomato paste, and 4 bottles of squeezable Heinz ketchup. They spend half an hour over the Cuisinart. And when they finally reached the right consistency, they pour the whole witch's brew into the Ziploc bag until it's full to bursting, and they seal it up. And Ray, bare-chested, lies out on the kitchen table like a dead Egyptian prince as they mummify the bag of fake blood to his body with an entire roll of duct tape. And when they are completely done, Ray is strapped with a flak vest of fake blood, and they can barely squeeze him into an extra-large adult t-shirt. And they get ready to go off to the theater because it's time for Shakespeare. And it's a beautiful show. It is, to watch 8th grade girls doing 12th nights and high school sophomores putting on As You Like It. And it's only then that a camp counselor steps forward and says, "Thank you. And now we will have Ray Ferris, Sapiwo Mandekile, and Danny Torricelli to perform Act 1, Scene 4 of Richard III, The Murder of the Duke of Clarence." And the curtain rises on Ray, looking as much like Sir John Gielgud as a 12-year-old boy possibly can, who has 4 gallons of fake blood strapped to his chest. When in come the murderers. And it actually helps here that Sapiwo and Danny look a lot like Samuel L. Jackson and John Travolta. They come marching in with their impressive-looking stage daggers, and Ray looks up at them in terror. "Why look you so pale? Your eyes do menace me. Who sent you hither? Wherefore have you come?" And at this point, Shakespeare actually has the murderers forget their lines. In the first folio, it has the first murderer looking at the second and saying, to, and the Duke actually has to prompt them to murder me? And that's when they get in character. I, and they launch into this 10-minute argument about how we're not such bad people for killing you. You killed a lot of people in Henry VI Part 3 yourself, so this is just payback, isn't it? And the Duke says, "Oh, it's so terrible that I should be stabbed to death, but even worse by the likes of you." And then, at last, the Duke pulls out his trump card. He says, "You don't want to stab me, because my brother Richard told me that he was going to get me out of jail. And if you raise a hand against me, Richard's going to be very angry at you." And that's when Sapiwo gets that psychotic glare in his eye. And he pulls out his impressive-looking stage dagger and says, "Thou deceivest thyself, for 'tis he that sent us hither to slaughter thee." And Ray is so close to the stabbing that he can taste it. And he says, It cannot be, for when we last parted, he hugged me in his arms and swore with sobs that he would labor my delivery. And Danny, who's pretty excited about this too, pulls out his impressive-looking stage dagger and says, "Why, so he doth, for now he delivers thee from this world's thraldom to the joys of heaven." And Sapiwo follows up with, "Make peace with God, my lord, for thou must die." Whunk. And the three of them look down at Ray's chest. And it's only now that they realize that they have used way too much duct tape. And these retractable stage knives just aren't making any headway past the 3 layers insulating the Ziploc bag. And in a panic, the Duke of Clarence goes into his death speech. "Hast thou that holy feeling in thy soul that thou can counsel me to make my peace with God, when thou art to thy own soul so blind that thou would war with God by murdering me?" And Danny doesn't know what to say, except for the very line that Shakespeare has written for him. "What shall we do now?" And the Duke lunges for the second murderer's wrist. "Relent! Relent! And save your souls!" And Sapiwo is trying to get in at the bag from the side. "Relent! 'Tis cowardly and womanish!" And Ray throws the knives off and goes into his death rattle. "Not to relent is beastly, savage, and devilish. Oh, which of you, if you were a prince's son, being pent from liberty as I am now, if 2 such murderers as yourselves came to, would not entreat for life? Oh, sir, I spy in thy look some pity. Oh, if thy look be not a flatterer, come thou and entreat for me, as you would if you were in my distress. A begging prince, what beggar pities not?" And at this point, out of pity, the second murderer is supposed to pick the Duke up off the floor. And Danny grabs Ray and puts him into that reverse full Nelson that he's seen Stone Cold Steve Austin do so often, and hikes Ray up over the wheel of his back so that Ray is like a dragonfly in the corkboard. And Sapiwo is gonna take one last stab at it. "Take that! And that! And if all this will not do, I'll drown thee in the Malmsey butt within. And with one last stroke, the Duke of Clarence's chest detonates all over Tingle's faces, hair all over, and Danny underneath gets 4 gallons of V8 juice coming all the way down the back of his leg. And Ray is just one big ink blot. And the Duke of Clarence oozes triumphantly off the murderer's back with intention, with emotional commitment, and goes splat into the lake of blood on the stage, which sprays little droplets of V8 juice 5 rows into the audience, smearing the lenses of a dozen yuppie camcorders. And the whole crowd just recoils. And the camp counselors start to sit up and they go, "Hey, that's not method acting." And Sapiwo and Danny are left standing next to the Duke's soggy corpse, dripping with blood, like the prom scene in Carrie. And they don't know what to say, except for the very lines that Shakespeare has written for them. A bloody deed, and desperately dispatched. And the second murderer looks like he just got called into the principal's office. How fain would I, like Pilate, wash my hands of this most grievous, guilty murder done. And they have to grab the Duke by his ankles and drag him off the stage, leaving a long red trail like a slug. And they call an unscheduled 10-minute intermission just to clean up. Because they cannot have Romeo and Juliet slipping in the Duke of Clarence's gore. And they asked Ray and Sapiwo and Danny never to come back to Camp Shakespeare. But I say, that's bullshit. You see, you know that you've seen authentic Shakespeare when they have to hose the blood off the stage. And when the riffraff in the cheap seats has been laughing at the most inappropriate